Imagine discovering, in a simple, dusty trunk, that the life you knew is a lie, that everything you believed about your family, about who you are, is about to be unmasked. Lúcia, a young woman who lives a quiet, unsurprising life, finds herself in a whirlwind of emotions and questions when she finds a letter that reveals a devastating secret. She is not the biological daughter of the parents she has always known. What happens when a family's dark past is brought to light? Prepare for a journey of mysteries, impossible choices, and a truth that will change everything forever. What would you do if you discovered that your identity was never truly yours? Lúcia had always felt like her life was a blank canvas, a sequence of days unfolding with the calm predictability of a steady routine. Born and raised in a small town, she had never known the hectic pace of big cities, but neither had she experienced the turmoil of uncertainty. Instead, she lived in a serene quiet, where tomorrow seemed no different from today, and the small joys of daily life were enough to provide her with a sense of security. The scent of fresh coffee on Sunday mornings, the sound of dry leaves rustling in the wind, casual conversations with neighbors. These were the moments that formed the backbone of her existence. Lúcia was the type of person who didn't ask much from life. She was grateful for the small things, for what she had, and content to live in the world around her. Her job at a home decor store, while not exactly her dream, provided her with the stability she needed. There, she worked with beauty and color, and for a while, that was enough to fill her days. She was never a big dreamer, nor a person of great ambitions, and it seemed only natural for her to be that way. Her closest friends always saw her as someone calm and serene, someone who preferred stability over adventure. Her social life was simple, filled with gatherings with familiar faces in quiet bars or Sunday lunches with her grandmother and parents, the central figures in her world. Lúcia's family was, for her, a safe haven. She grew up surrounded by the immense love of her parents, who always supported her, cared for her, and raised her with strong values. They were simple people, but with a huge heart. Her grandmother, who lived next door, had always been her greatest source of wisdom and comfort. Lúcia would spend entire afternoons listening to her grandmother's old stories, often repeated, but always comforting. She felt that the world around her was made up of these small, simple connections, and that was all she needed. Her life was peaceful and predictable, but until then, she had never questioned whether it was enough. However, deep down, Lúcia carried a discomfort, a restlessness that she didn't know how to name. It wasn't something grand, nor an existential crisis that made her feel the need to change her life. It was a subtle feeling, an invisible hole in her chest that occasionally surfaced. But Lúcia always ignored it, thinking it was just a passing sensation, something that would fade with time. She, like many others, believed that happiness was found in the simple things, in the smile of those we love, in sincere hugs, in the small victories of daily life. Yet, fate had other plans for her, and the tranquility of her life was about to be shattered in a way she could never have imagined. What Lúcia didn't know was that in a simple gesture, a seemingly ordinary gesture but so significant, her reality would be transformed. Until that moment, she had believed her life to be unchangeable, that everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. But destiny, as it often does, had something bigger and more frightening in store for her. And like a row of dominoes, a small secret that had been buried for decades was about to trigger a series of events that would change her life forever. It was any other day when Lúcia found herself facing something she never imagined she would uncover. She was at her grandmother's house, a place that had always brought her comfort, when her eyes fell upon an object that seemed out of place. An old chest, hidden in a dusty corner of the room. She had never noticed it before, but something inside her urged her to open it. What she found inside wasn't just a chest filled with forgotten trinkets from the past. Inside, there was something much more precious and disturbing. A letter that would change everything. The letter, written by someone she never expected, contained words that opened a chapter she never knew existed in her family's story. That chest, and everything inside it, was the spark that would ignite a journey that would lead her to unearth truths deep and painful about her very identity. It was a hot summer afternoon when Lúcia decided to visit her grandmother, something she did often, though not with the same frequency as in recent months. The routine of her life had become so predictable that a visit to the familiar, comforting house, where the scent of coffee and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees never seemed to change, had become a necessary part of her cycle to maintain her peace of mind. Her grandmother's house, with its old wooden walls and furniture that told stories of a bygone era, always had an air of mystery. It was a place where the past seemed to intertwine with the present. Her grandmother, Dona Beatriz, had always been the guardian of old memories, of untold secrets, that she kept with care, and that Lúcia, in her innocence, had never given much thought to. On that particular day, Lúcia arrived with the simple intention of spending a quiet afternoon, as she always did. Her grandmother was busy in the kitchen, preparing the same orange cake she loved, and the house, as usual, enveloped her in a peaceful warmth. However, something felt different that afternoon. Perhaps it was the intense heat, or perhaps it was simply a vague feeling that something was about to happen. Lúcia had no idea why, but she felt an inexplicable need to explore a corner of the house she had never paid much attention to before. It was the attic, a place she had always thought of as uninviting, with exposed beams and the dust that time had accumulated on each forgotten object. But that afternoon, driven by an unusual curiosity, Lúcia decided to climb the creaky stairs that led to the space. The light from the day barely managed to filter through the dusty windows, and the dimness of the room seemed to carry the memories of many years. The air was thick with the scent of old books and aged wood. And then, as she sifted through the boxes and stacked furniture, her eyes fell upon something that seemed completely out of place. A chest. Small, dark wood with rusty iron details. It seemed so out of place among the other relics she had come to know, and it was hidden behind a pile of old cushions, as if it had been waiting for her to find it. A mixture of hesitation and curiosity overtook Lúcia as she approached it. Her heart began to race. She didn't know why, but the chest felt significant, like it held something important, something that could change everything. She knelt down, and with trembling hands removed the lid. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers and dusty objects, all carefully arranged, as if someone had kept them there for safekeeping. But it was a letter that immediately caught her attention. It was there, at the very bottom, on top of everything else, almost as if it had been waiting for her. An old yellow envelope, crinkled with age, but with handwriting that seemed familiar. Something inside her urged her to open it. With a deep breath, Lúcia slid the paper from the envelope. The letter was dated from many years ago, from a time she knew her grandmother and parents avoided revisiting. The words written on it were not just any correspondence. They were profound, mysterious, and spoke of something Lúcia had never heard of. Dearest Beatrice. The start of the letter seemed harmless enough, but as Lúcia moved further into the message, her heart began to race. The handwriting flowed, but the message conveyed a deep secret, a history her family had kept buried. The letter spoke of a forbidden love, of a woman who had made a difficult decision, of a child who could never be acknowledged as her own, and a secret that had been carried for generations. And in the middle of that revelation, Lúcia's name appeared, like a piece in a puzzle she never knew existed. She didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying it. It was all there, clear as day. She was not the biological child of her parents. What had happened years ago, something beyond her reach, had altered the course of her life, and the lives of her family, in ways she could never have imagined. The weight of that truth hit her with the force of a punch to the stomach. Every image of her childhood, every word of affection she had heard, every gesture of care, everything began to unravel before her eyes. What was left? What did it all mean? Who were the people she had always known as her family? How could this be true? Lúcia stopped reading for a moment, trying to process what she had just learned. She didn't know what to do with those words. They sounded like they were meant for someone else. But now, somehow, they were hers. And with them, her entire understanding of her life and her identity was called into question. She didn't want to accept it, but it was undeniable. All she had known was no longer the truth, and this revelation, this one discovery, was the first step toward a journey that would change everything. With trembling hands, she closed the chest, but the weight of the truth refused to let her go. She knew that her life, as she had known it, was over. The truth about her past had begun to unravel, and she couldn't go back. The only option left was to face the consequences and move forward, whatever that might mean. Lúcia couldn't sleep that night. The weight of what she had just discovered churned in her stomach like a storm that refused to settle. She lay awake in bed, her mind replaying the letter over and over again. She was not the child of her parents. How could this be? The truth was more than just a revelation. It was an earthquake, shattering everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about the world around her. The next day, the morning sun seemed too bright, the usual sounds of the city too loud, as if everything was mocking the quiet chaos that was consuming her. She had hoped that the night would bring some clarity, but it had only intensified the questions swirling in her mind. What did it mean to be the daughter of someone who wasn't her biological mother? What did it mean for the love her parents had given her? Was it real, or was it built on a foundation of lies? She needed answers. She had to understand what had happened, who she really was, and why this secret had been kept from her for so long. Lúcia didn't wait for the perfect moment. She knew she couldn't sit with the silence any longer. She called her parents. The conversation was inevitable. They had to face it. They had to explain everything. When they answered the phone, Lúcia could hear her father's voice tremble, just a little. She had never noticed how much their voices could betray them before. But now, every inflection, every pause, felt like a telltale sign. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I found the letter," she said, her voice calm but firm. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Her father cleared his throat before responding. "Lúcia, No." She cut him off. "Don't. I need to hear it from you. Why didn't you tell me? Why was this kept from me?" Her mother's voice joined in, trembling with emotion. "We didn't want to hurt you, Lúcia. We thought—" She stopped herself, struggling to find the right words. "We just wanted to protect you." Lúcia could feel her heart racing. The words didn't comfort her. They only made the distance between them feel more profound. "You think I'd be better off not knowing? That this secret would protect me? You can't protect me from the truth. You never should have tried." Her parents tried to explain, but Lúcia didn't listen. She had heard enough. The words had already done their damage. The realization had already sunk in. And now, all she could feel was the unbearable weight of betrayal. The truth that she wasn't their biological daughter. The truth that her whole life was based on a lie. It made her question everything. The conversation ended with Lúcia's heart heavier than it had ever been. She hung up the phone, but the silence that followed was even worse than before. She hadn't expected a resolution, not yet. She needed time to process, time to figure out who she was. But one thing became clear in that moment. The love her parents had given her was real, but the foundation of her life, the very identity she had been given, was not. Lúcia knew she couldn't go on living in the shadows of a false identity. She needed to find out more, to understand who her biological parents were, to understand what part of herself had been hidden away for so long. She felt as if everything she had been taught to believe was unraveling, like a rug being pulled from under her feet. And all she could do was hold on tight, knowing that no matter what she uncovered, she would have to learn to rebuild her life from the ground up. The journey ahead would be one of pain and confusion, but also of discovery. What she didn't know was that this hidden secret, this truth that had been kept from her, would ultimately lead her to the most powerful revelation of all, the power to define herself, to choose who she would become in the face of the unknown. But for now, all Lúcia could do was breathe. The storm had begun, and she was about to face it head-on. Lúcia's world spun in slow motion as she processed. The phone call, the words from her parents echoing in her mind. It felt like everything she had once known was suddenly fading into the distance, leaving her with nothing but a void, an abyss of unanswered questions and raw emotions. The truth was out there now, but it was no comfort. It only deepened the turmoil inside her. Sitting in her living room, the phone still warm in her hand, Lúcia let the silence take over. Her chest felt tight, her breathing shallow, as if the weight of the revelation was physically pressing down on her. How could they have kept something so huge from her? The anger burned deep, but it was quickly overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of betrayal. The people who had loved her, raised her, built her life with her, they weren't the people she thought they were. Her mind raced. She replayed every moment she had shared with her parents, every laugh, every hug, every quiet afternoon spent in their company. Were they all just part of a lie? Lúcia felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. Of course they were real. The love they gave me was real. But in that moment, she couldn't escape the fact that the very foundation of her life had been built on something false, something hidden. She had been a part of something, a family that she thought was her own. But now it felt like she was standing outside looking in, watching a life that no longer made sense. She stood up abruptly, pacing across the room, trying to breathe through the chaos swirling in. Her mind. There were so many things to process, so many things to figure out. How would she face them now? How would she look at her parents again, knowing what she knew? Could she ever look at them the same way? Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not when she had no idea what the next step would be. The truth had shattered her. But in that break, she felt something else. Something new. Clarity. She wasn't just angry. She was confused, but also strangely determined. Determined to find out who she truly was. She couldn't live a life defined by others' choices anymore. She wasn't going to let the secrets from her past hold her back. Her next step was clear. She had to learn about her real identity. She had to understand her origins. And in doing so, she would begin to understand herself. The path ahead was uncertain, full of painful revelations and uncomfortable truths. But Lúcia knew she had no other choice. She had to face it. The anger, the sadness, and the confusion would pass. Eventually. But the decision to search for answers would stay with her. And that decision would be the one that shaped her future. She was finally ready to stop being defined by the lies and take control of her own story. Lúcia took a deep breath, a sense of quiet resolve filling her as she stepped away from the couch. The storm in her heart had not subsided, but she was no longer afraid of it. It was hers now, hers to face, hers to navigate. And when she was through, she would emerge from the other side with something she had never known she could possess. Her own truth. Her phone buzzed with a text message, but she ignored it. She wasn't ready to face anyone. Not yet. For now, it was just her, alone with her thoughts, ready to begin the next chapter of her life. She stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air, the world feeling different, but somehow more real. This was the beginning. Lúcia could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stood in front of her grandmother's house. The familiar sight of the old building, the faded flowers in the garden, the creaking steps leading up to the door. It should have brought comfort, but now it felt foreign to her. She had to know more, to piece together the fragments of a story that had been kept hidden for so long. She had to confront the past. The weight of the decision settled heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't move forward without knowing the full truth. The letter she'd found had opened a door to a world she never knew existed, and now it was time to walk through it. She needed to ask her grandmother the questions that had been burning inside her for days. The answers, whatever they were, had to be revealed. She knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. Moments passed before she heard the familiar shuffle of footsteps inside. Her grandmother opened the door, her face soft with a smile. But Lúcia could see the hesitation in her eyes. The warmth that used to flow freely between them was now tangled with something else, something unspoken. "Lúcia, my dear, what brings you here?" Dona Beatriz asked, her voice gentle but strained. "I need to talk to you, Grandma. It's important," Lúcia replied, her voice steady, though her hands shook. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the tension thick between them. The house smelled like old wood and cinnamon. Comforting scents, but today they felt suffocating. Lúcia sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had spent so many hours listening to her grandmother's stories, her laughter filling the air. Now, the silence between them was heavy, suffocating. Dona Beatriz sat across from her, folding her hands in her lap. Lúcia could feel the weight of the years in the space between them. It was as if the old woman was trying to protect her from something. But Lúcia wasn't a child anymore. She had to know the truth. "I found the letter," Lúcia said, her voice breaking the quiet. "The one from the chest. The one that says I'm not your biological granddaughter. I need to understand. Please tell me everything." Dona Beatriz's face paled, and for a moment, Lúcia thought her grandmother might collapse under the weight of the question. She took a deep breath and slowly reached for a small box on the shelf above them. She opened it, revealing photographs and letters, fragments of a past Lúcia had never seen before. "The truth is complicated, my dear," Dona Beatriz began, her voice soft, tinged with sorrow. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted to protect you. But now you deserve to know who you really are." The words were painful, but Lúcia didn't flinch. She had come this far. She had to know, no matter how hard it was. Her grandmother told her about a time long ago, before Lúcia was born, when a decision had to be made. A decision made with love, but also with deep sorrow. Her biological mother had been forced to give her up, for reasons Lúcia could hardly comprehend. The woman who had given birth to her had been a stranger to Lúcia, a woman whose name was now a whisper in the wind, lost in time. As the pieces of her past fell into place, Lúcia's emotions surged. She was overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the story. But there was something else, something liberating in the truth. This was the past she had never known. This was the life that had shaped her without her knowledge. But no matter how painful, this was also the beginning of her journey to understand herself, the woman who she was, who she had become, and who she would choose to be. Her grandmother's voice trailed off, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no more hiding. "I'm sorry, Lúcia. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was keeping you from knowing who you truly are." Lúcia's heart was heavy, but she wasn't angry. Not anymore. What was the point? She was being given the truth, and now she had the power to decide what it meant. She could choose who she wanted to be. She could choose to embrace the past, or she could walk away from it. It was her decision now. Lúcia stood up, her body trembling, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She smiled at her grandmother, a small, bittersweet smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for telling me. I'll figure this out." She turned and walked out of the house, her heart aching but strangely full. The questions had been answered, but the journey was far from over. What she did with the truth was up to her. The road ahead was still unclear, but Lúcia knew that she would walk it on her own terms. No more hiding, no more secrets. It was time for her to define her future, to create her own path. As Lúcia left her grandmother's house, the weight that had pressed on her chest for so long seemed to lift, replaced with a new clarity. The search for answers had led her to this moment, and now she was free. The truth had set her free, but the future, her future, was still unwritten, and she was ready to write it herself. Lucia sat by the window of her apartment, staring out at the world around her. The city was alive with motion, the streets busy, the hum of life playing out below her. But inside, she felt as though she were standing still, caught in a whirlwind of emotions that she couldn't control. The truth about her origins had shaken her to the core, but now, the real battle wasn't the revelation itself. No, the real battle was the one inside her, fighting to make sense of who she was and what it all meant for her future. For days, she'd been wrestling with a storm of thoughts, a cacophony of doubt and fear. The love she had always felt from her parents, the life they had built for her, the comfort of knowing where she came from. Everything had been turned upside down. How could she trust the memories that she had held so dear all her life? Was any of it real? And more than that, who was she now? Was she the person she thought she was? Or was she someone entirely different? The questions were endless. Who was she without the history she had always known? Was her identity a creation of others' stories? Or was it something she could shape herself? The past had been a tightrope she had walked carefully, but now that rope was gone, and Lúcia felt as though she were falling into a deep, dark unknown. Every mirror she looked into seemed to reflect someone she didn't recognize. The face staring back at her was familiar in shape, in expression, but not in essence. It was as if she were watching a stranger. She had been defined by the love of a family that wasn't biologically hers, by the life that had been constructed for her, by the choices of others. But if those choices were based on a lie, then who was she now? What did it mean to be Lúcia in the wake of everything she had just learned? The more she thought about it, the more her mind twisted into confusion. What was real about her life? What had been the truth? She could hear the voices of her parents in her head, the words they had said, the love they had given her. And yet, how could she not question everything now? Was she simply the byproduct of their choices, of their decision to keep her in the dark? And if so, what did that say about her worth? Had she ever truly known herself? Lúcia stood up, unable to sit still anymore. The questions swirled and swirled in her mind, threatening to drown her. Who am I? Who am I really? She had always believed that she was the product of love, the cherished daughter of the parents who raised her. But now, she couldn't help but wonder, was her love real? Was her identity something others had created for her? Or was it something deeper? And, most of all, could she even trust herself anymore? Her fingers brushed against the edge of the window, the cold glass reminding her of how distant she had become from the world she once knew. The feeling of isolation crept in, despite the bustling world outside. She had spent so much of her life living for others, adhering to the role that was given to her. Now, with the weight of truth on her shoulders, she had to figure out who she was beneath it all. The thought of facing her family, of looking her parents in the eye again, filled her with anxiety. What would she say? How could she even begin to process this new version of herself in front of them? She no longer felt like their daughter in the same way. She no longer felt like she belonged to the identity they had given her. And how could they understand the storm raging inside her? They didn't know the weight of the truth they had kept from her. They didn't understand the way it had reshaped her understanding of everything she had believed to be true. But then, in the quiet of her apartment, something inside her began to shift. The weight of the confusion and the pain was still there, but in the depths of that turmoil, she felt a spark of something new, something powerful. I can redefine who I am, she thought. I don't have to live in the shadow of this secret. I can choose to shape my own future. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The questions, the doubts, they would follow her for a long time. But she also realized that the very act of questioning, the very act of challenging everything she thought she knew, was a form of liberation. She didn't have to be who others expected her to be. She could step out of the mold that had been created for her and decide for herself who she would become. Lúcia looked out the window again, but this time, her heart was different. She was no longer trapped by the past or by the uncertainty of who she was. She was ready to find herself, not as the person she'd been told to be, but as the person she was meant to be. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead with open eyes and an open heart. For the first time in a long time, Lúcia didn't feel lost. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she felt the stirrings of self-discovery, and that, for her, was the first step toward freedom. Lúcia knew the moment had come. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, that gnawing discomfort that told her she couldn't avoid it any longer. She had to face her parents. The truth was out there, and it was time to confront them about it. They had kept this secret from her for so long, and now she was determined to find out why. The morning light streamed through the curtains as Lúcia sat on her bed, preparing herself. The house felt too quiet, too still. She hadn't been back to her childhood home since the revelation, and now, as she sat there, staring at the phone in her hands, she was filled with both dread and an undeniable sense of purpose. She had spent days stewing in anger, confusion, and betrayal. Now, it was time to face the people who had kept her in the dark. Her fingers hovered over the phone screen. Should I call? Should I just show up? She took a deep breath and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then her mother picked up, her voice as calm and warm as it always had been. "Lúcia, sweetie, how are you?" But Lúcia couldn't bring herself to answer the question in the usual way. She wasn't fine anymore. She wasn't even close. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice wavering with the weight of everything she was about to say. About the letter, about the truth. There was silence on the other end. A long pause, and then her mother's voice cracked. "Lúcia, please? Why didn't you tell me?" Lúcia cut her off. "Why did you keep this from me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" She could feel her mother's hesitation through the phone, the struggle to find words. But Lúcia wasn't giving up. She needed answers, and she couldn't wait any longer. "I thought I was protecting you," her mother whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. "I didn't want you to feel different. I didn't want you to feel less than." But Lúcia wasn't listening to the excuses. She wasn't interested in hearing more about the decision they had made so long ago, the decision that had led to the pain she was feeling now. She had heard enough of those justifications. Her heart ached with the words her mother had said, but there was no room for that right now. There was only the need to confront the truth, to demand it. "Do you really think that would have been easier? To live my whole life thinking I was one thing, and then suddenly find out it was all a lie?" Lúcia's voice shook with the raw emotion she had been holding back. "You don't get to decide what I can handle, Mom. You didn't trust me enough to know that I could handle the truth. You didn't give me the chance to choose." On the other side, her mother fell silent, and Lúcia felt a wave of guilt wash over her for raising her voice like that. But there was no way to undo what had been done, no way to turn back time. The only way forward was to face the pain head-on, no matter how much it hurt. When the conversation ended, Lúcia sat in silence, her phone still in her hand. The house seemed colder now, emptier. The weight of what she had just done hung heavily in the air. She had confronted the people she loved most, the ones who had given her a life filled with love and care. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a battle, one she had fought because she needed to. That evening, she went to her parents' house. The confrontation she had been preparing for was inevitable. They needed to speak in person. As she stood at the door, her hand poised to knock, she felt a mixture of fear and defiance. What will I say when I see them? When her mother opened the door, the look on her face was one of guilt and sadness, but also something else. A quiet understanding that Lúcia was no longer the daughter who could be shielded from the truth. This moment wasn't just about confronting the lies. It was about confronting the shifting relationship between them. "I've been thinking," Lúcia said, stepping inside, "about the life we've had, about the love you gave me. and I know it was real. But now I have to know who I am without the story you told me, without the version of myself you created." Her mother, who had always been the pillar of their home, seemed to shrink under the weight of Lucia's words. The years of pretending, the years of protecting her from the truth, all of it seemed to hang in the air. "Lucia, I never meant to hurt you," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," Lucia replied softly, though the pain was still there, sharp in her chest. "But I can't go on pretending anymore. I can't live in a story that isn't mine." The room was filled with a silence so thick, it almost felt suffocating. Lucia could see the tears in her mother's eyes, but she didn't feel the same sorrow. Instead, she felt the release of something long held within her. "I have the right to my own truth," she realized. The journey was far from over. There would be more moments like this, more conversations, more difficult realizations. But for the first time in her life, Lucia felt a sense of power, the power to shape her own future, to live authentically. She wasn't just the product of the life others had given her. She was her own person, with her own story to tell. And so, as she left her parents' house, a part of her heart felt lighter. She hadn't gained all the answers yet, but the weight of the past had been lifted, and that was enough. For now, she would forge ahead, no longer weighed down by the secrets that had bound her to a past she didn't choose. This was just the beginning. The rest of her life, her real life, was waiting for her to live it. And she was ready. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more impactful journeys of self-discovery and transformation. Embrace your own truth. Your future is in your hands. Lucia hadn't planned to be alone. Yet, as the days passed, it felt like solitude was the only companion she could trust. She'd tried to bury herself in work, to distract herself with the usual routines. But the silence of her apartment, the quiet spaces between thoughts, only made her more aware of the stillness within herself. It was as if the world had stopped. Or perhaps it was she who had stopped. She was caught between the echoes of a past that no longer fit, and a future she wasn't sure how to embrace. Her mind wandered back to the conversations with her parents, the words they had said, the emotion in their voices. At first, it all seemed like betrayal, like a cruel twist of fate. But now, in the depths of her solitude, she felt the weight of their love. It had been real. She couldn't deny that. But in the same breath, she knew she had to let go of the narrative they had written for her. The love was genuine, but the story was not hers to own. She felt the tension between gratitude for their care and the undeniable need to build her own story. Sitting by the window, Lucia stared out at the city streets below, watching as life moved around her. People hurried by, oblivious to the quiet storm within her. The breeze through the trees whispered a reminder that time continued to flow, whether she was ready or not. But Lucia wasn't ready. Not yet. She was still trying to piece together who she truly was. How could she? If she couldn't trust the past, how could she trust her own identity? Her thoughts felt fragmented, like shards of glass scattering across the floor, each one sharp, dangerous, reflecting a version of herself she couldn't quite make sense of. Who am I now? She wondered. She had once felt so certain about her place in the world, but now, every step seemed uncertain. The person she had been, the daughter they had raised, was no longer who she was. The truth about her biological heritage, the secret that had come to light, was a crack in the mirror that had distorted everything she had seen about herself. Lucia's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, the warmth offering a slight comfort as she sat in silence. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there, but the weight of her thoughts kept her in place. She tried to calm her mind, but the questions kept coming. What do I do with all of this? The pain of losing the security of her past, the foundation she had relied on for so long, was suffocating. But the emptiness that followed wasn't just pain. It was possibility. I have to make sense of this, she thought. I have to decide who I am. But how could she? She didn't even know where to begin. The idea of redefining herself felt overwhelming. The thought of opening her heart to the unknown, to a new version of herself, terrified her. But it also excited her. Perhaps this was the point, the moment of choice. She could either continue down the path of self-doubt and fear, or she could step forward boldly into the unknown and discover a version of herself that was truly her own. In these quiet moments of reflection, Lúcia realized something crucial. The process of self-discovery wasn't about finding all the answers. It was about learning to sit with the uncertainty, to trust that even in the unknown, she could still move forward. She didn't have to have it all figured out. She only needed to be willing to take the first step. That, she knew, would be the hardest part. As the days passed, Lúcia grew more comfortable in her solitude. It wasn't loneliness, but rather a space for introspection, a necessary pause before the next chapter. She began journaling, writing her thoughts down on paper, allowing herself to feel the weight of her emotions without the pressure of knowing how to fix them. Each word she wrote felt like a step toward clarity. The more she allowed herself to feel, the more she understood that it was okay to be uncertain, to be confused. That was part of her journey. The loneliness didn't go away, but it became less daunting. It transformed from a heavy burden into a quiet companion. In her solitude, Lúcia discovered a sense of strength she hadn't known she had. She didn't need to rely on the past to define her. She didn't need the approval of others to feel whole. The answers, she realized, weren't out there waiting for her. They were within her. And with each day that passed, she grew a little more sure that she could find her way, one small decision at a time. Lúcia knew that the road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer afraid of the silence. She was no longer afraid of the unknown. In fact, she was beginning to embrace it, knowing that in the emptiness, she could begin to create her own story, one that was truly her own, and that in itself was the most powerful realization of all. If you connected with Lúcia's journey of self-discovery and introspection, don't forget to like and subscribe for more transformative stories. Embrace your own journey of growth and learn to find strength in the moments of silence. The path to knowing yourself starts now. The weight of the past was still there, lingering, but Lúcia no longer felt crushed by it. After weeks of reflection, uncertainty, and internal struggle, she knew she had reached a pivotal moment in her life. The truth had unraveled everything she thought she knew about herself, but now it was time to take control of what came next. No more living under the shadow of lies. No more being defined by what others chose for her. It was time for Lúcia to build her own life, on her own terms. She sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the room, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something stirring inside her, a sense of purpose, of clarity. The confusion that had clouded her mind was slowly lifting, replaced by an unexpected sense of freedom. Freedom to be who she was, not who she had been told to be. The chains of her past were still there, but they were beginning to lose their power. She had the key now, and she was ready to unlock the door. Her phone buzzed, a text from an old friend asking if she was free for coffee. Lúcia smiled faintly, not because she felt like going out, but because she realized something in that moment. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She wasn't waiting for life to unfold. She was ready to step forward, to take action, to start making decisions that were aligned with the person she was becoming, not the person she had been. Lúcia got up from the table, went to her closet, and pulled out the clothes she had been keeping for a special occasion that never seemed to come. She realized that the time for waiting was over. She had everything she needed within herself to create the life she wanted. It wasn't about a job, a relationship, or the validation of others. It was about the choices she made from this point forward. She could be anyone, do anything, and there was no need to apologize for it. Her first step was the decision to leave her job, the safe, predictable job she had held onto out of fear. It wasn't the right path for her anymore. She had spent too many years just going along with what was expected of her. It was time to pursue something more authentic, something that aligned with the person she was becoming. She didn't know exactly what that looked like, but she knew she couldn't stay where she was any longer. She needed to make space for something new. Her heart raced as she picked up the phone, making the call to her boss. The conversation was short, polite, but when she hung up, she felt a sense of release. It was done. The first step had been taken. She had broken free from the constraints of a life that wasn't truly hers. And now, she could build something entirely different. Her future was hers to shape. Lúcia smiled, the smallest of smiles, as she sat back down at her kitchen table. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't something that felt immediately comfortable, but it felt right. There would be hard days ahead. There would be moments of doubt. But now, for the first time in a long time, Lúcia felt like she was living in alignment with herself. She started to think about the possibilities. The world wasn't just a series of obstacles anymore. It was full of opportunities. The journey she had embarked on wasn't just about discovering the truth of her origins. It was about discovering the truth of who she was, who she could be. And in that process, Lúcia realized that she was not defined by her past or by the secrets that had been kept from her. She was the sum of her choices, her growth, her willingness to change. She could already feel herself beginning to shed the layers of doubt and fear that had once defined her. The future was still uncertain, but that uncertainty no longer scared her. It excited her. The possibilities were endless. She had learned that the most important thing in life was to trust herself, to trust that she had everything inside her to create the future she wanted. And so, as the days unfolded, Lúcia moved forward with a new sense of purpose. She didn't know exactly where the road would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer waiting for life to happen to her. She was making it happen, one choice at a time. If Lúcia's journey of transformation inspired you to take charge of your own future, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of empowerment and growth. Your future is waiting, and it's time to step into it with confidence. Let's embrace the change together. Lúcia stood at the edge of her new life, feeling the shift inside her, like the ground beneath her feet had moved just enough for her to feel a sense of balance. It wasn't dramatic, and it certainly didn't happen overnight, but something inside her had changed. The journey she had been on, filled with self-doubt, pain, and the overwhelming weight of truth, had led her to this very moment, a place of clarity, freedom, and self-empowerment. She had made a choice, and that choice was the most important one she could have made. She had chosen herself. She had chosen to embrace her true identity, to let go of the fears and constraints that had held her back. She had chosen to move forward, no longer defined by the past or by the lies that had once shaped her life. The past no longer held her captive. The truth had set her free, and now it was time to claim the future she had always deserved. As she walked through the streets of the city, the world seemed to hum with energy. People passed by, absorbed in their own lives. But Lúcia was different now. She could feel the strength inside her, a strength she had never known she had. She wasn't just walking through life anymore. She was creating it, with every decision, with every action. She had stepped into her own power, and that power was something no one could take from her. The weight of her journey was still there, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a badge of honor. She had been through the storm, and now she was standing in the light. And as she stood in that light, she knew that this moment, this turning point, was just the beginning. The choices she had made had carved a path forward, but it was up to her to walk it. And she was ready. Lúcia knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be times when doubt would creep in, when fear would try to pull her back into old patterns. But she also knew that she could face whatever came her way. She had already faced the hardest truth of all, the truth about herself, and survived. She could handle anything now. The great turning point wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what was yet to come. The possibilities stretched out before her, like an open road leading into the unknown. And for the first time, Lúcia didn't fear that unknown. She embraced it, because she knew that no matter what, she had the strength, the courage, and the wisdom to navigate it. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow across the horizon, Lúcia took a deep breath, a feeling of peace settling within her. The road ahead was hers to walk, and she wasn't walking it alone. She had herself now, truly, fully, and unapologetically. And in that moment, Lúcia realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. The past no longer had a hold on her. The future was wide open. She could be anyone, do anything, and there was no limit to what she could achieve. This was her time. If you've been inspired by Lúcia's journey of self-discovery and transformation, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your own journey is waiting for you. Step into it with confidence and embrace the endless possibilities ahead. Let's walk this path together,